Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is the story about Naruto. What if Naruto has steel release? Part 5. Hope you'll enjoy this video. So before we start, please do support for more awesome content and also hit the subscribe button and share this video with your friends. And also support the creator of this fanfic. I have created many playlists. Check it out in the channel. So let's start the video. On the first day after teammates returned to Konoha, Shino left the Aburum compound at the edge of Konoha at precisely 9 in the morning. He quickly made his way to the food market at the center of the village, choosing from experience the best side alleys to follow in order to avoid Konoha's morning merchant traffic. Once there, he settled in a shaded alcove, passing time by watching a cloth merchant on the opposite side of the street set up his daily outdoor display. His wait did not last long. Only a few minutes had passed when he spotted Sakura's distinctive head of pink hair bobbing its way through the busy market. The bug user left the alcove and deftly weaved his way through the bustling crowds until he was directly behind his teammate. He then followed her for a few steps before making his presence known in his most casual tone of voice. "Hey." The pink-haired girl whirled around with wide eyes, mouth open in surprise, and one hand clutched to her chest. "How do you always do that?" Shino shrugged. "Breakfast first?" "Sure," Sakura replied. The pair made their way to one of the market's food stands. Shino ordered a large plate of yakitori for himself. Sakura settled for miso soup and rice along with a small dish of pickled vegetables, plus one of Shino's skewers of grilled chicken. With breakfast out of the way, the pair quickly made their way to Konoha's public library. Once there, they asked the librarian on duty to see a list of available private study rooms. After a few moments of thought, Shino deliberately chose one in the modern poetry annex, knowing that it would give them the greatest degree of privacy of all the available rooms. Nevertheless, he still took the time to place several pickets with his bugs for advanced warning if anyone approached the room. Sakura waited until Shino closed and locked the study room's door before asking, "So how should we do this? I think it might be prudent to first lay out everything we know about him." Sakura began counting facts off on her fingers as she recited them. "He's an orphan. He entered the academy at the same time we did, but during our second year there was some kind of incident and he was hospitalized. He came back at the beginning of third year missing one eye, but then was hospitalized again near the end for some reason. He was put on a genin team with us, and during your fight with Haku we found out he has a red eye where he should be missing altogether. He also has some way of healing himself." Sakura paused for a few seconds before turning her eyes to Shino and speaking again. "Do you remember our academy graduation exams? In the taijutsu part, Sasuke pulled off his headband at the beginning. I remember he spent the rest of the fight covering his face with one hand. I always thought that was odd, but it makes sense now." Shino nodded. "I was engaged in my own test at the time, but I recall hearing about it. He's clearly gone to great lengths to conceal the eye. During the fight with Haku he said he wasn't well liked in Konoha and that if the existence of the eye were known people would treat him worse. Since being put on the same team as him, I've noticed that many villagers look at him in a different way than they do us." "But why though?" Sakura asked. "I remember my mom telling me not to play with him when I was little. It can't be because he's an orphan. I remember Shu-chan from the academy was an orphan too, and mom didn't say anything about her. Just Naruto. I don't know. Do you know anything about his parentage?" The pink-haired girl shook her head. "He's never said anything about them, and I get the feeling he may not know who they were at all. There are a number of orphans with unknown backgrounds around our generation because of the Kyuubi attack. We seem to be at an impasse then. I suggest that we try to find out more about his past before we make any further conjectures." "That's a good idea. I'll head to the Hall of Records and see if I can dig anything up. I might be able to talk them into letting me see some documents or something. What about you?" Shino gave the question some thought before responding. "I think I'll head for the Nin history section of the library. If his healing ability is a Kekkei Genkai, there might be some historical records of some clan in the past with that ability." "Okay, meet back here in 3 hours?" Sakura asked. Shino nodded. Sakura looked up as the study room door opened exactly 3 hours after she and Shino left to follow their separate research paths. After weeks of getting to know him, she had learned that her bug user teammate was remarkably punctual with everything he did. Shino nodded at her as he entered the room. She waited until he had locked the door and seated himself before asking, "How did it go?" "Nothing particularly useful," the bug user replied. Though absence of evidence is not absolute evidence of absence, there are no records of any Konoha clan that have similar bloodline healing abilities. I also tried searching for a clan based on his last name, as well. I was able to find out that Uzumaki is a common family name from the former Whirlpool country, but nothing beyond that. So Naruto's probably the child of one of the refugees from Whirlpool after it was destroyed? Most likely, but that doesn't explain the village's animosity towards him. Whatever his parentage, Naruto himself was definitely born in Konoha. As an orphan with no knowledge of his parents, there would be no reason to carry any animosity towards them to their child. Shino shrugged before continuing. What about you? Did you find anything relevant? Sakura pulled out a small notepad from her hip pouch and tossed it on the table. I talked him into letting me see some of Naruto's records, but there really wasn't much that we didn't already know. There was one interesting thing though. You know how orphans no longer living in an orphanage are given a stipend from the civilian village council? I found out that Naruto's stipend comes from the Hokage's office instead. Not especially helpful, Shino noted, but it does confirm our suspicion that there's something unusual about him. The bug user picked up Sakura's notepad and read through the list of Naruto-related facts that she had compiled. There were the standard items such as birth date, address, academy entry, and graduation dates, as well as a few other things that Shino didn't find particularly relevant. He flipped the page and suppressed an urge to smile at her doodle of a super deformed manga-style Hokage. Evidently there really hadn't been much information to be gleaned from the whole of records. Shino felt a flash of recognition in the back of his mind but couldn't identify the exact source. He turned the page back and began studying the few facts Sakura had managed to compile in more detail. Sakura was startled by the sudden burst of intensity she felt coming from across the table. She looked up to find that Shino had turned her notepad to face her with his finger pointing at the top bullet point. The pink-haired girl couldn't see his eyes through the dark sunglasses, but she was sure that they were boring into her intently. His birthday is October 10. That was the day the Kyuubi attacked, but I don't see why being born on the same day would make the villagers hate him. There are others who were born on the same day, and they're treated normally, and… Her voice trailed off as the pieces of the puzzle clicked into place in her mind. Her mouth kept moving of its own accord, but a minute passed before she found her voice again. No, it can't be the history books, the academy teachers said. What if the history books and our teachers deliberately misled us? Shino asked. But why? Shino leaned back in his chair and angled his head up to face the ceiling, not bothering to hide the uncertainty he felt. The adult villagers evidently know, judging by the way they look at Naruto. I can only guess that the knowledge was deliberately withheld from our generation to prevent it from further spreading. A minute passed in silence before Sakura spoke again. Do you think Sensei knows? She must. She would have been old enough when the Kyuubi attacked, and in any case it would be irresponsible for Hokage-sama to put Naruto on her team without her knowing about this. What should we do then? Shino simply shrugged. He didn't know how to answer Sakura's question. Instead he closed his eyes and began re-examining his own feelings about his blonde teammate. After teammates returned from Wave Country, 4 days passed before Kurenai found time to visit her female student's house. She rapped her knuckles on the door lightly and took half a step back to wait. Several seconds later the door opened to reveal a surprised-looking Sakura. Sensei? Kurenai picked up on the slight tremor in her student's tone. Sakura, is something wrong? No, nothing, I just didn't sleep well last night. The red-eyed Jounin was almost certain that the answer was an evasion, but decided to let the matter drop for the moment. She had more important matters to deal with. There's something I'd like to discuss with you, Sakura. Would you mind if we talked inside? Oh, sure. My parents are out of town for a couple days, so it's just me in the house. Sakura stepped to one side to allow her sensei into the house. Once the pink-haired Kunoichi had closed and locked the front door, she led Kurenai to the kitchen. Tea? We have Tamaryoku and Takanon. Sure, either one's fine. The red-eyed Jounin used the ensuing silence while Sakura bustled about making tea to take in her surroundings. The Haruno house was tastefully decorated, with the predominant colors being beige and pale lavender. The furnishings spoke of the family's civilian background. There was nothing at all to indicate that an active duty ninja lived on the premises. A series of photos hung in the hallway that led from the front door to the kitchen. They depicted the family at various points in time with the first showing Sakura as a small child and the last around the time of her academy graduation. Kurenai noted that her student had inherited her distinctive hair color from her mother, though the elder Haruno wore her hair in a tight bun. "Tea's ready," Sakura called out from the kitchen. Kurenai returned to the kitchen and sat where Sakura indicated, accepting her mug of tea with a smile and a nod of thanks. Sakura moved to the opposite side of the kitchen table and sat down with her own mug of tea. "So, what do you want to talk about, sensei?" Once again Kurenai decided to set aside the odd tone she detected in her student's words. This conversation was going to be difficult enough by itself. "Sakura, how much did Haku teach you about Shosen Jutsu?" "Well, she told me what she knew about the theory and showed me how to focus the chakra to my palms. I can kind of get a little bit of a green aura, but it's not stable and there isn't enough for healing anyway." Kurenai sipped her tea thoughtfully. She hadn't expected Sakura to be able to produce anything visible yet, but this might make things easier. "Do you remember what we discussed the morning we left Azuna-san's house after the rest of the team and Haku left the room?" "Yeah," Sakura answered hesitantly. The red-eyed jounin decided to get straight to the point. "Sakura, I'm here to offer you a position in the next medical ninjutsu training group. Their schedule starts in 3 weeks." Sakura's eyes widened in surprise, but Kurenai held up a hand before the pink-haired girl could say anything. "There's a catch though. This is full-time medical training. You would have to pull out of Team 8. Sakura's expression rapidly changed from surprised joy to confusion and alarm. "But sensei." Kurenai waved her hand to cut her student off again. "Before I say anything more, I want you to understand that this is entirely your choice, that I'm not trying to push you in one direction or another. I'm going to lay out the facts for you as I see them, but the choice is yours. Whichever path you decide to choose, you will have my full support. Do you understand what I'm saying?" The pink-haired Kunoichi slowly nodded. "Good." Kurenai took another slow sip of her tea, using the action to buy a few seconds of delay before continuing. "I looked into this to give you an alternative to the life of a ninja. The hospital chief of medicine, Sanzanin Sensei, was impressed by your interest in medical ninjutsu and level of chakra control. You're not quite at the level they expect for entry into full-time medical ninjutsu study, as candidates are typically chunin rank when they switch over. Sanzanin Sensei has said, though, that he would be willing to personally train you until the beginning of the session in order to make sure your skills are up to par. The fact that you can already start producing the beginning of a Shaosen Jutsu will help." "Sensei, are you saying I'm not good enough to be a ninja?" Sakura asked hesitantly. "I'm not saying that at all," the jounin instructor replied. "You brought up the fact that you couldn't help but freeze up during the wave mission. That's a problem we can work through, and you can be a successful kunoichi once you overcome it. This is just another way you can choose to develop your skills." "But, Sakura, not everyone's suited for the life of a ninja, and there's no shame in realizing that. If Konoha were nothing but shinobi, it would collapse right away, as none of the tasks that people in other professions deal with would get done. Although the role isn't as flashy or glamorous, medical ninjutsu specialists are as vital to the village's success as the shinobi. If you look at it another way, anyone who can control their chakra to some extent and has passed academy testing can serve Konoha in the field as a ninja, while only a small percentage of those have the required control to pursue the medic nin path. In that sense, medical ninjutsu specialists are a rarer and more valuable resource." "So," Sakura began, with eyes downcast and one finger tracing the rim of her mug. "Do you think I can be successful in medical ninjutsu?" "I'm sure of it," the red-eyed jounin said firmly. "I'm just as sure, though, that with enough time we can overcome your problem of freezing during fights." Sakura looked up, and for the first time since she broached the topic, Kurenai saw a bit of life in the girl's eyes. "But what about the team, sensei? I've spoken with Hokage-sama, and he's agreed to put Haku on Team 8 on a probationary basis if you choose to take up Sanzanin Sensei's offer. I don't want that to affect your decision though. If you choose to stay with Team 8, he'll keep her as an unattached genin until a team or some other mission can be found for her." But Sakura hesitated for a few moments before continuing. "But what will Shino and Naruto think? I mean, if I did this?" Team 8's jounin instructor turned the question back on her student. "You've been around your teammates long enough to get a sense of them. How do you think they would react?" "I don't know. I think Shino might be okay with it, he's pretty logical about everything. But I just don't really know Naruto well enough to know what he would think." In truth, that was the issue that worried the red-eyed jounin most. She felt that she had a good sense of her students' personalities. With something major like this though, it was difficult to predict their reactions with certainty. She didn't want that to weigh on her pink-haired student's decision though. The issue of team dynamics was her problem, as the Jounin instructor, not Sakura's. I think if they understood your reasoning, they would be supportive of your choice. Sakura didn't answer immediately. Instead, she swirled her cooling tea around a bit before bringing the mug to her lips and taking a large gulp. I really did have an unrealistically romantic view of shinobi life, didn't I, sensei? I still remember what I said on the first day, during introductions. Thinking back on it now, it sounds so silly compared to what Shino and Naruto said. Kurenai smiled sympathetically at the younger Kunoichi. I will admit that I had some concerns when I heard that. Still, it's good that you have self-awareness now, it's a trait that's lacking in too many people. Sakura flashed a brief smile at her sensei before looking down at her mug once more. She swirled the remains of her tea around for a few seconds, watching as the small amount of liquid left formed a mini vortex within the mug before speaking again. I don't know what I should do. On the one hand, this is like a dream come true. I've always wanted to study medical ninjutsu. On the other hand though, I feel like I'd be abandoning the guys. Sakura, I can't make this decision for you. But you'll have my full support whichever path you choose to take, Kurenai assured her. I'll do my best to get Naruto and Shino to understand and support your choice as well. Can I think about it for a day or two? Of course. This is a very important decision for you, and I'm not going to pressure you into choosing until you're satisfied you've thought it through properly. Thanks, sensei. Strolling through Konoha's busy streets during mid-morning, Haku experienced an unfamiliar sensation welling within her. It took her a few moments to identify the feeling. She realized that what she was experiencing was contentment. Growing up as a missing nin's apprentice had not been easy. It was a life constantly on the move, without a clear sense of direction, and with no feeling of permanence beyond what you could carry in a backpack. There were moments of great happiness, moments of sheer terror, and everything in between. There had never been any moments of simple peaceful contentment though. The uncertainty of the lifestyle gave every feeling a hard edge. Haku had only been in Konoha for 1 week. She recalled how nervous she had been when she first walked through the village's gates, her steps bolstered by nothing more than her faith that Zetsubou would not deliberately send her to her own end. In that 1 week though, the Hokage and Kurenai had shown her kindness beyond what she expected. The village's leader had made a place for her in Konoha, while the red-eyed Jounin had provided Haku a place to live within her own home. The Ice Maiden was under no illusions. The interrogation sessions she was put through after her first meeting with the Hokage had been performed with a soft touch, but had also been quite thorough. There was even someone from the Konoha Mindwalker clan that she had read about, and she had submitted to his probing only with great reluctance. There was also the constant Anbu surveillance. She couldn't see them, but an occasional feeling of being watched reminded her of their existence. Even Kurenai taking her in served the purpose of keeping her under watch. She couldn't begrudge them those precautions. She fully understood why they would take those measures with a shinobi they saw as having questionable loyalties and motivations. Even if they didn't fully trust her though, the Hokage had still given her a leaf hitate and allowed her free run of the village as long as she promised to stay within its confines. The Hokage had even given her a new surname. After running away from her home village, Haku had sworn to never again use the family name she had been born with. While on the move with Zabuza, she had occasionally used his name when she needed to. The Hokage had suggested that she adopt the name of a Konoha merchant clan that had died out several generations back instead, in order to hide her identity from anyone who might be looking for her, and also to establish a plausible link to Konoha for herself. At first she had been uncertain, but over the past several days she had come to like the way her new full name sounded. When she objectively compared her life now with how she lived before, she had to admit that she was easily better off. The only thing she regretted about her new life, though it was a very large regret, was no longer being with the person she considered her adoptive father. Good morning, Fayuno-san. Haku turned to the rotund merchant who had addressed her, giving him a smile and a light bow. Good morning to you too, fruit vendor-san. The large man gave the raven-haired girl a wide grin of his own. Are you here today to buy some more fruit? Haku shook her head apologetically. I'm sorry, no. I was just taking a walk. The fruit merchant clutched at his heart in an exaggerated display even as his face contorted into a comical parody of sadness. Haku had to put a hand to her mouth to cover her giggles at his antics. The man dropped his arms and allowed his face to resume a more natural posture. If you do need any more fruit, don't forget, I sell the freshest and juiciest fruit in all of Konoha. I'll be sure to keep it in mind as a fruit vendor-san. Haku gave him another light bow before turning to continue down the street. She had been startled when, several days ago, the fruit vendor greeted her warmly as she passed by. He had struck up a conversation with her based solely on the fact that she was a Konoha shinobi that he had never met before. When she said that she was a new genin, which was technically true, he had assumed that she was fresh from the academy and gave her an ashi pear as a graduation gift. The simple act of kindness from a complete stranger had touched the raven-haired girl greatly. When Kurenai asked her to do some grocery shopping the next day, she had made it a point to buy something from the fruit vendor as a way of thanking him. She remembered how the citizens of Water Country looked at those who bore the Kiri village symbol, their furtive glances filled with barely veiled fear and hatred. In contrast, her experience with the villagers of Konoha had been nothing but positive. Even if they didn't know who she was, they gave her warm smiles or respect just for wearing the aid of Konoha's protectors. Haku-chan. The ice maiden turned her head at the distinctive voice, pausing to give its owner time to catch up. Good morning, Sakura-san, Haku said with a smile and a small nod. Teammate's pink-haired Kunoichi had become Haku's best friend in her new life by virtue of simply interacting with her the most. After the Ice Maiden's release from interrogation, Sakura had sought her out every day for help with Shosen Jutsu or simply to discuss first aid techniques that she had picked up over the years treating Zabuza's various injuries. Sakura had also taken it upon herself to show her new friend around Konoha, pointing out the best places to eat or shop for clothes. That looks really good on you, Sakura commented as she caught up to the older girl. Haku looked down at the cornflower blue yukata she was wearing. It was decorated with muted green and purple floral patterns and tied close to her body by a red sash around the waist. Thank you. It was Kurenai-san's before she outgrew it. She gave it to me to wear since I don't have much in the way of clothes yet. What are you up to? Haku responded with a shrug. Nothing really, I'm just out on a walk. I thought I might explore some of the markets today. Do you mind if I come with you then? I haven't been out shopping since coming back from Wave Country. Of course, the raven-haired girl said with a smile, I would welcome the company. The two Kunoichi matched paces and headed further into Konoha's market district, chatting amicably as they went. Haku quickly noticed something different about her companion. The pink-haired girl's steps had a bounce to them that wasn't present before, and there was more vibrancy in her hand gestures and body movements as she spoke. It was almost as if Sakura had been relieved of a burden that she had been carrying for a long time. Sakura-san, Haku asked during a lull in the conversation, did something happen? Sakura responded without taking her eyes away from a clothing store's window display. On the other side of the glass, the mannequin exhibited a red sleeveless top with white trim accentuated by a loose black wrap around the legs with a slit up to the hip. The pink-haired girl's mind immediately began putting the two together in combination with some of the clothing pieces and accessories that she already owned. It seems like you're happier today than you've been the last several days, Haku said. Did something happen? Sakura reluctantly turned away from the window display to look at the older girl. Oh, it's nothing really. It's just, after coming back from my first mission out of Konoha, it's finally just sinking in that I'm really home. Haku accepted the answer with a nod. She had the feeling that Sakura was hiding something in her reply, but decided that it was not her place to press for a better answer. She was grateful at Sakura's efforts at befriending her and did not want to do anything that might harm her growing bond with the other girl. The pink-haired girl turned back to gaze longingly at the window display for a few more seconds before coming to a decision. She reached out to grab Haku's hand. Come on, let's go inside here. I want to get that outfit and you could use some more clothes. Haku allowed Sakura to lead her into the store, smiling as she listened to her companion describing how various accessories might look with the clothes on the mannequin display. There had been no children around her age in the village she grew up in, and once Zabuza had taken her in, there had never been any opportunities to make lasting friends. Haku found the experience of having a girlfriend quite novel and pleasant. Half an hour later, both Kunoichi emerged from the store with shopping bags in hand. Sakura had bought the outfit on display right away, but had also persuaded Haku to get something as well. It was a cream-colored robe decorated with blue flower and leaf patterns, tailored in a similar cut as the one she'd worn when she met Naruto in the forest. Haku had not wanted to buy the outfit at first, as she did not want to spend any more than necessary from the amount that the Hokage had provided her to get settled with. The Ice Maiden had relented, however, when Sakura pointed out that once she was allowed to take missions she could earn enough to live on, and that she needed more clothes anyway. "I've seen Shino-san once or twice since I've been in Konoha," Haku commented, as the pair walked further down the street. "I haven't seen Naruto-san at all though. Is he okay?" Sakura faltered mid-step, stumbling slightly before recovering. Haku chose not to say anything, momentarily slowing her stride instead to keep pace with her pink-haired companion. She did not want to be rude and drawing attention to the other girl's misstep. "I haven't seen him either," Sakura finally said. "They might have him in the hospital checking on his healing bloodline limit, I guess. Kurenai-sensei's called for another team meeting tomorrow, so I guess we might see him then." "Team meeting? Are you going to be leaving Konoha for another mission again?" Haku asked. Aside from Sakura and the other members of Team 8, Haku had become acquainted with only one other person in Konoha on more than a casual basis. It was Kurenai's Kunoichi friend, the strange one with purple hair. The trench-coated Takebetsu Jounin had dropped by several times since Haku started living with Kurenai. The raven-haired girl suspected that this Anko person was keeping tabs on her as another part of the Hokage's security precautions, though she and Kurenai interacted in a way that clearly showed a close friendship. As much as she thought about it though, Haku couldn't understand how two people who were seemingly so different in every way could become such good friends. There was one thing she did know though, and that was the fact that she really didn't want to be left alone in Konoha with only Anko to talk to while Kurenai and Team 8 left for another mission. Though Anko had never threatened her in any way, Haku still found herself a little afraid of the older woman. The Takebetsu Jounin reminded her too much of a more talkative female's abuser. Only with more crazy. "A mission?" "Oh no," Sakura replied as she waved her free hand in a gesture of dismissal. "Ever since we got together, as a team, Kurenai-sensei has been holding little get-togethers at her place on Saturdays. She says it's to have us try out new recipes or as a reward after a week of hard work, but we all know that she's really doing it to promote team bonding." "So you think Naruto-san would be there?" "Probably. I don't really know, but I haven't heard anything about him. I think Kurenai-sensei would probably tell us if there was something wrong with him. I guess." "Why?" Sakura added after a moment's thought. "No reason really, I'm just curious," Haku replied. The Ice Maiden didn't know how she should feel about the blonde. He had saved her life on the bridge. She had been too stunned to even rationally comprehend what was happening at the time, much less move out of the way of the arrows. She had used what she knew of medical ninjutsu on him afterwards, but she didn't know how much that really meant in the face of the debt she owed him. Naruto's healing ability far exceeded what she had been able to do, and she wasn't sure if her skills ultimately made any difference in his survival. There was also the fact that he had barely spoken to her at all on the journey to Konoha. She didn't know if it was because he harbored some resentment towards her for her actions on the bridge or something else entirely. Even Shino, who she understood from conversations with Sakura, was supposed to be the quiet one of the group, had spoken to her more than Naruto during the trip. "Haku-chan?" The raven-haired girl blinked as Sakura's voice cut into her thoughts. "Yes? Are you okay?" Sakura asked. "You had this faraway look, like you were really out of it." "I was just thinking about how different my life is now," Haku replied, not wanting to voice her uncertainty about Naruto. "You and Kurenai-san have been really good to me. The villagers are nice too. I'm still trying to get used to it all. I'm sure you'll be right at home once Hokage-sama clears you for duties," Sakura said reassuringly. "It's getting close to noon though, how about we head to the food market for lunch?" "My treat." "Are you sure?" Haku asked. "I have money, I can pay my way. Don't worry about it. Think of it as a belated welcome to Konoha present and my way of thanking you for helping me with medical ninjutsu," Sakura said firmly. The Ice Maiden smiled at her companion. "You'll have to let me treat you back once I start doing missions and earning money though. Anko, get your fingers out of there." "Oh come on Kurenai, just a little bit?" "No, try that again, and I'll take a kunai to your fingers." It was the first Saturday after Team 8 returned from Wave Country. There was less than half an hour left before Kurenai's students would arrive at her house for the usual team meeting. Konoha's mistress was busy battering and then deep-frying shrimp and thin slices of vegetables. She was also using her body to block Anko's thieving fingers from reaching the large plate that contained her finished work. Given Anko's skills as a ninja and her willingness to use shinobi wire and to steal the tempura, it was a more difficult task than it sounded. More than once, Kurenai considered just trapping Anko in case of being attacked by an army of giant fluffy teddy bears until it was time to eat. "Haku," she asked without looking away from her own cooking, "how's the yakisoba coming along?" The raven-haired girl plated another batch of stir-fried noodles with vegetables as she replied, "I've nearly finished, Kurenai-san." The red-eyed Jounin nodded. She had been assigning Haku small tasks to help out with as a way to get the younger girl more settled into her new life and had found her to be quite helpful with daily chores. After Haku mentioned being the one to do most of the cooking while traveling with Zabuza, Kurenai began teaching her more advanced cooking skills as well. The things that could be accomplished with a fully equipped kitchen were far superior to what the raven-haired girl had been used to in her previous life. There were limits to what could be done on a campfire with a pot and some sticks. A light knocking alerted Kurenai to the arrival of her genin just as she was finished with her cooking. After setting the plate of tempura aside, she dragged a protesting Anko out of the kitchen with her to prevent the purple-haired woman from stealing food. Kurenai opened the door to see Sakura and Shino standing side by side. "We came across Naruto about half an hour ago, sensei," Sakura said. "He said he might be a little late, he had to see Hokage-sama about something." "Okay, why don't the two of you come in first?" "We'll wait a bit for Naruto," teammates Jounin instructor replied as she stepped aside to make way for her two students. Kurenai wondered what it was that Naruto had to speak to the Hokage about. She had been called to the interrogation group's headquarters the day before to pick him up after a bickie, and the hospital's chief of medicine finally decided it was safe to let him return to regular duty status. It had been late in the day by the time the paperwork was finished with. She only had the time to lead the blonde to a ramen stand for a quick meal before taking him home and sending him straight to bed. Sakura-san, Shino-san, and Haku greeted each other as she emerged from the kitchen with several plates of steaming hot yakisoba in hand. Her words were met with a light hug from the pink-haired girl and a nod from the bug user. "Let's eat," Anko declared once Haku had set the plates down. Kurenai turned to her friend. "We're going to wait a bit for Naruto first." "Why?" Anko pouted. "If he's not going to be on time, the kid should be happy with just, oh hey, he's just up the street, so we can eat, yes?" Kurenai turned, her gaze following the direction Anko was pointing at. As the trench-coated Takebetsu Jounin had said, Naruto had just turned the corner at the end of the street and was now making his way purposefully towards the house. Kurenai also noted that he was carrying a scroll in his hand. She turned back to her purple-haired friend. "Yes, we can eat. Go get the plate of tempura, will you? And I know exactly how many pieces there are. If there's even one missing, I'm never cooking for you again." Anko flashed Kurenai an impudent grin before heading into the kitchen. The red-eyed Jounin turned to wait for Naruto, glancing meaningfully at the scroll in his hands before giving him a questioning look as he approached. "Sakura told me you had to see Hokage-sama. Was it because of that scroll?" Kurenai asked. Naruto nodded as he lifted the large scroll he was carrying. "I wanted to see if I could make a storage seal after I saw that thing Haku did in Tazuna-san's house. The library doesn't have anything on seals beyond basic books with general theories though, so I went to see if Jiji had anything I could read about it. I figured it could be useful to bring more gear along on missions. I ran out of kunai and shuriken after our first fight with Zabuza in Wave." Kurenai nodded in understanding. It was unusual for genin to use storage seals. They were like exploding tags in that they took some skill with sealing and considerable chakra to design, but once crafted could be used by anyone that could run chakra into their trigger elements. They were quite expensive when commissioned from sealing experts. For a typical genin, it was cheaper and more economical to either purchase a bigger backpack or simply learn to pack more efficiently. "You can get started on that later, Naruto. Come on in, it's almost time to eat." "Yes, sensei." Once the meal was over, Kurenai ushered her guests into the living room. Haku, assuming that the red-eyed Jounin wanted some privacy for her team's meeting, had gotten up with the intention of heading upstairs to her room. Kurenai moved to stop her by loosely gripping the younger girl's upper arm with one hand, however. "Kurenai-san?" the raven-haired girl asked with a confused expression on her face. The Jounin smiled at Haku as she led the girl into the living room with the others. "It's okay, you can stay." Once she had guided Haku to a place on a couch beside Sakura, Kurenai moved to occupy a chair next to Anko. She gave the genin in the room a few moments to settle in before speaking. This is our first meeting after teammates' first C rank mission, and I'd like to open things by saying that I'm proud of how all of you handled yourselves during the mission." Kurenai noticed that Sakura had lowered her head a little. Evidently she was still feeling guilty about how little she was able to contribute during the mission. The Jounin decided not to bring attention to the pink-haired girl's reaction. Instead, she continued her prepared words without missing a beat. Zetsubou's involvement complicated the mission enough to have it officially reclassified as A rank. The three of you were able to overcome the challenge through quick thinking and teamwork though. Not only did we complete the mission and free Wave Country from Gator's stranglehold, we were also able to bring back a valuable addition to Konoha's nin forces. Kurenai paused briefly to nod in Haku's direction before continuing. Before we take on more missions, however, we need to discuss some changes to how this team will operate. Firstly, Sakura will no longer be part of the team. Teammates Jounin instructor paused for dramatic effect. Sakura had made her decision earlier in the week, and Anko knew of the plan as well. 2.5 other sets of eyes glanced first at Sakura and then Kurenai, confusion written on their owners' faces. Uncharacteristically, Shino was the first to speak. "Sensei, is it because?" The bug user let his words trail off. From the subtle shift in his body posture, Kurenai deduced that he had come to the same conclusion about Sakura's combat performance during the mission, but didn't want to voice his thoughts in front of his teammate. "No, it's not," the red-eyed Jounin lied with firmness in her voice. "I spoke to the hospital's chief of medicine, and he was impressed enough by Sakura's potential that he offered her personal tutoring and a spot in the next medical ninjutsu training group. Applicants for medic nin training usually have several years more experience and come from chunin ranks. It's extremely unusual for the chief of medicine to take enough interest in a student to offer personal tutelage, let alone a candidate who isn't even in medical training yet, so this represents a great opportunity. I discussed the idea with Sakura over the last week, and eventually she came to this decision on her own." She turned her gaze to Naruto and Shino, making sure that they understood that her next comments were directed at them specifically. She had put considerable effort into bringing her three students together and didn't want this to create a permanent rift in their relationships. "I want you to understand that Sakura isn't abandoning the team or anything like that. Konoha has many people with enough control over chakra to become ninja. Out of that population, there's a much smaller number with the control to use medical ninjutsu techniques successfully, so Konoha is always in need of capable medics. It was a difficult decision for her to make, but in the end she'll be able to serve Konoha's needs more effectively." Shino turned to Sakura. His dark sunglasses effectively hid his eyes, but Kurenai had learned to interpret the bug user's body language well enough to know that they were looking at Sakura questioningly. "Sakura?" Shino asked. "Well, I gave it a lot of thought and, well, I decided this was where I could do the most good and I'd be more useful with medic nin training and, well." Naruto's voice cut into Sakura's increasingly rambling response. "The bottom line is, this is what you've always wanted, isn't it? You've been studying first aid techniques all this time, just so you could prepare for when you got the chance at proper medical ninjutsu training, right?" "Yeah," Sakura replied hesitantly. Naruto smiled at her. "Then it's your dream in life, and you should grasp the opportunity with both hands. We'll be sad that you're no longer with us all the time, but we'll be cheering for you as much as you can. Right, Shino?" The bug user simply nodded in response. Kurenai noticed though that he put slightly more head and body movement into the motion than normal. To anyone else it would simply look like a regular nod. She doubted that anyone besides those closest to Shino would have picked up on the difference. "See?" Naruto continued, "Shino thinks the same way too. I don't know how we could help with your training, but if there's anything we can do, just let us know. Maybe I could go and get beat up so you could practice healing me." Sakura smiled. "Thanks guys. I really mean it. I was really afraid you'd be mad at me for doing this. I really didn't want to leave the team with bad feelings, so I'm glad you guys understand." "That goes for me too, Sakura," Kurenai added. "The three of you are my first genin team, and that means something special to me. Even if you're no longer under my direct supervision, I still want to see you succeed. You can always come to me for help with anything, or if you just want to talk." "Thank you, sensei. I'll try my hardest. I know that this is a unique opportunity, so I'll do my best to make you proud that you helped give me this chance." Kurenai gave her ex-student a smile before turning back to Naruto and Shino. "There aren't any rules saying that genin teams have to be 3 members strong. It's traditionally done that way though, and there are some things which teams cannot do without having the right number of people. I've spoken to Hokage-sama, and he has agreed to the idea of putting Haku on the team in Sakura's place. I'm going to give the two of you the final choice however. You can accept Haku as a teammate, but you need to understand that due to her special situation teammate would be restricted to D-rank missions until Hokage-sama feels it's safe to allow her outside the village. The alternative is to remain as a two-person team and wait for another Konoha genin in need of a team, doing D ranks and whatever C ranks the mission board thinks are safe for a reduced team. Haku's eyes had widened at the mention of her name, but she kept silent to see how Naruto and Shino would react. For a minute silence dominated the room as the two remaining members of Team 8 exchanged looks with each other. Finally Sakura decided to speak out for her new friend. I don't know if my words mean anything since I'm not a member of the team anymore. But I'd like it if the two of you considered the idea. She's helped me a lot with medical stuff, and I may not have gotten a chance to study it formally without her help. She's also going to be more useful than I was, I mean she's a better fighter, and… Shino held up a hand, indicating for Sakura to stop. He then turned to Kurenai. Sensei, what's your opinion on this? Kurenai allowed a few seconds to pass before responding. In truth she had already planned her words and arguments out well in advance, but she wanted to take the time to consider Shino's interaction with Sakura. He had cut her off with his hand gesture, but it didn't seem to have been done in a way that indicated he didn't care what she had to say. It took a moment for Kurenai to realize that he had done it for the same reason that he cut his own words off before. He was deliberately trying to spare Sakura any mention of her comparatively poor skills in fighting. Teammates Jounin instructor filed that bit of information away even as she allowed her mouth to form the pre-arranged response. I think Haku would be a valuable addition to the team. From a purely tactical perspective her abilities complement yours and Naruto's well. Looking at the situation from another perspective, Hokage-sama trusts her enough to let her wear the leaf hit I-8, so allowing her on a genin team is the next logical step. It would make most sense to put her on a team that she's already familiar with rather than grouping her with strangers. Her words had been deliberately chosen to appeal to the bug user's sense of logic. She left unspoken the fact that putting Haku in Team 8 would keep her under even closer supervision and allow the Hokage to start testing her loyalty in a structured way by selectively choosing which missions the team would receive. Shino nodded in acceptance of his sensei's reply. I do not have any objection to allowing Haku on the team. We are no longer enemies and, as you pointed out, she would be a good tactical addition to the team. Kurenai turned to her other student. Naruto? Naruto shrugged while glancing in Haku's direction. I don't have any problems with it I guess. She did heal me after the fight. If our missions are going to be limited either way, we might, as well, take the option that makes the team stronger. Kurenai nodded and then turned to her new housemate. Haku, what do you think about taking Sakura's place on Team 8? I would be honored. I'm grateful for the level of trust you're showing in me. Thank you for giving me this chance, Shino-san, Naruto-san. The raven-haired girl ended her words with a bow in the direction of the two male genin in the room. Just call me Shino, the bug user suggested. We're a team now, there's no need for honorifics. Me too, Naruto added. And me, Sakura declared as she patted her friend on the shoulder. Good luck Haku, I'm sure you'll do great. I'll try my best to fulfill all your expectations of me, a somewhat embarrassed Haku said. She was happy that they were allowing her to use their names without honorifics. It was a small thing, but it was also a gesture that showed her they were willing to accept her. Shino turned back towards his instructor. I have a question though. What is Shino? Kurenai asked. The red-eyed Jounin had expected something about training or missions, but Shino turned to the blonde seated on the couch next to him instead. I want to ask about the chakra flare and your eye Naruto. It's Kyuubi isn't it? Shino said in a matter-of-fact tone. How did you? Naruto abruptly cut himself off as he realized he had inadvertently answered his teammate's question. His gaze darted around the room. In the brief second that he made eye contact with her, Kurenai thought that he had the look of a trapped animal. She could feel Anko tensing up beside her as well. She held up a hand, indicating to Naruto that he should stay silent for the moment. Shino, tell me your reasoning for why you just said that. The bug user took several seconds to adjust his sunglasses before responding. Sakura and I already know, and if we were able to put things together, Haku would also have been able to in time. I deduced from villagers' reactions to Naruto that everyone above a certain age knew, thus I assumed that you and Anko-san knew as well. That's a reasonable assumption, Kurenai replied, not wanting to give anything away for the moment. How did you and Sakura come to this conclusion? We spent some time researching the issue the day after our return from Wave Country. We were attempting to look for any history of Kekkei Genkai similar to Naruto's healing ability, but found none. Sakura was the one who eventually acquired Naruto's birthday from the Hall of Records. With that information, the other pieces fell into place naturally. Given the way the villagers look at Naruto, it's not a very effectively kept secret when one is inclined to investigate. Kurenai did not answer immediately. Instead, she glanced at Naruto out of the corner of her eye. The blonde had pulled himself together somewhat and was now staring at the ground before him with an impassive face. She turned back to Shino. Before I say anything, I want you to understand that next time you have potentially sensitive information, you should come to me or another direct superior first. Your reasoning on whether or not those around you should have access to the information may be correct, but it's possible that there are other factors you're not aware of. Shino nodded in silent acceptance of the critique. The red-eyed Jounin considered what to say next, quickly going through several scenarios in her mind, but was beaten to it by Naruto. It's not the Kyuubi, the blonde muttered. Naruto then glanced up slightly, his blue eye meeting Kurenai's red eyes. She considered the situation for a moment before giving him a slight nod. He looked back down at the ground for a few seconds and then came to a decision. Naruto straightened his posture, his right eye closing even as his left hand moved to push his aid up. His left hand briefly moved to cover the left side of his face in a last moment of hesitation. Finally, the blonde's hand fell away from his face and he blinked open his red and blue eyes. Naruto's gaze moved around the room, meeting each of its occupants' eyes in turn. Haku looked slightly confused about the whole thing. He could understand that, not having grown up in Konoha, she didn't have a background understanding of things. I can go if you want, she suggested uncertainly as she started to rise from the couch. I don't want to intrude if it's not something I should know. Naruto shook his head. Stay. In some ways, this involves you more than anyone. Haku nodded and settled back into her seat, more confused than ever. The blonde turned to the pink-haired girl on the couch beside Haku. Sakura's hands were folded on her lap and her facial expression was carefully neutral. His sensei gave him a sympathetic smile as his eyes turned to her. When he moved on, he saw that Anko's eyes showed no trace of surprise at the development. You knew? Naruto asked in a quiet tone. Kurenai told me when you guys got back, the purple-haired Takebetsu Jounin replied. She thought it was something I should know if I were to keep teaching you. Will you? Anko shrugged. Doesn't change anything. We all have our own demons to deal with, some more literal than others. I judge you based on your actions, not on something that's beyond your control. Naruto nodded once in thanks before moving on. His eyes finally settled on Shino, sitting on the couch beside him with an expression that was even more unreadable than normal. Over the last few weeks, Naruto had started to form a bond with his teammates. He didn't know if it was friendship. The blonde had never had anyone his age who considered him to be a friend. Whatever the bond was though, he valued it greatly. He was afraid of losing it by what he was about to do, but was just as afraid of losing it through an action. Naruto closed his eyes once more and took several deep breaths. He crushed away the fear and hope in his heart with every breath. He had made the decision already. Whatever the result was, he would simply have to accept the consequences when they came. Once he felt that his breathing was sufficiently even, Naruto opened his eyes and willed himself to speak. It's not the Kyuubi, he said, repeating his earlier words with more firmness. It's supposed to be, but it's not. Sakura opened her mouth, but he held up a hand to forestall her question. Let me tell you a story. It started 12 years ago. Nearly an hour passed as the occupants of Kurenai's living room listened to Naruto with rapt silence. He left nothing out. He told them what he knew of the ceiling, described his dreams and his 2 meetings with the girl in his mind, and relayed the Hokage's thoughts on what was actually sealed inside him. By the time the blonde allowed his voice to trail off, he felt mentally exhausted. He dropped his head back down to look at the ground before him, afraid of the fear and rejection he might see in his teammates' eyes if he looked. Naruto allowed himself a few seconds of silent contemplation, counting them off while recalling his happiest moments spent with his teammates before speaking again. Shino? His voice was tired, hesitant. You're an idiot, the bug user replied simply. The blonde jerked his head up to stare at his teammate in surprise. "This entire time you've been worried about our reactions," Shino continued in his usual even tone of voice. "It was evident in your facial expression and your voice. I could smell your fear of rejection. But you never stopped to consider. It's been days since Sakura, and I came to the conclusion that you had the Kyuubi inside you, and we still spoke with you earlier today, still came here after. We could have gone to Hokage-sama and requested a team transfer long ago if we wanted. The fact that it might be a Shinigami rather than the Kyuubi changes nothing." "You mean?" Naruto looked back and forth to each of his teammates, his quavering voice betraying his feelings. Sakura was the first to respond. "At first we didn't really know how to react, so we spent a lot of time discussing it." Shino eventually pointed out that just because he carries bugs inside of him, that doesn't make him one. And he's right. You've been nothing but decent since we became a team. If you've had it inside of you this whole time, then it's not like your personality is going to suddenly change now. Shino nodded in agreement. In some ways, a Shinigami being sealed inside you makes the situation easier to accept than if it were the Kyuubi. Whatever it is though, its presence within you led indirectly to a satisfactory outcome during the Wave Country mission. The rest of us would have been put in significant danger if you had not been able to defeat Haku, and it was possible that you might not have survived the mission if your healing ability hadn't manifested. The adult villagers' attitude toward you is understandable given their direct experience with the Kyuubi attack, but also irrational. If you're truly the demon fox, socially isolating you would only make you more likely to turn on the village. If you're not, then it makes no sense to treat you as anything other than a normal child. "So you guys are really okay with this?" Naruto asked. There was hope in his eyes, but also fear of being mocked and rejected from the experience of growing up alone for 12 years. Sakura smiled at him from across the room. At the same time he felt Shino placing one hand on his shoulder. Naruto then turned to the last genin in the room. "What about you, Haku? As teammate's newest member you should get some say in this too." The raven-haired girl looked around the room for a moment, gathering her thoughts before replying. "I don't really understand what's going on. Most people in the elemental countries know about Kyuubi attacking Konoha, but I don't really understand any of the village's history beyond that. It doesn't matter though. You're just like me. You were born with something you have no control over. If I rejected you now, it would be like turning away from my own self." Naruto closed his eyes and allowed his head to drop again, but this time with a smile on his lips, and his shoulders relaxed from their previous tenseness. He had been happy when Kurenai had taken an interest in his development, but he also knew that it was part of her job as the team's jounin instructor. Now, for the first time in his life, he was being accepted by his peers with no preconditions. He clasped his hands together tightly even as he tried to carve the memory of what he was feeling into his heart. "I thank you. All of you. I mean it. I don't really know what else to say." Kurenai allowed herself a small smile at the scene before her. There were many points at which the day's discussion could have been derailed and the participants left with bad blood for each other. In the end though, everything had turned out as she hoped. She tapped Anko on the shoulder and gestured for the trench-coated Takebetsu jounin to follow her into the kitchen. This was a good opportunity for her to get her genin some more tea and light refreshments. There was still more she wanted to discuss with her students, but she could allow some time for Naruto to enjoy his moment first. "So unless you guys have any problem with it, I want to start holding team practices again tomorrow." Kurenai looked around the room as she finished her words. She had deliberately taken longer with the tea and snacks than necessary, keeping Anko and herself in the kitchen for over 10 minutes. She wanted to give the 4 members of Team 8, for she still considered Sakura one of her students, even if the pink-haired girl was officially no longer a part of the team, time to talk with each other without supervision. When the 2 jounin finally emerged from the kitchen, she had been pleased to find that there was an air of relaxed casualness amongst the genin. Seeing that none of her students were voicing any issues, Kurenai continued with her plans for team training. "Haku, I'll mostly want to work with you on teamwork for the time being. Your teammates need to know the full extent of your abilities, and you all need to learn to work and fight as a team. Shino, you did fine in the mission given the nature of your abilities. You would have benefited from a greater chakra reserve and more physical speed during the fight though. That's what I want you to be focusing on for now. Naruto, now that your teammates know about your eye, I want to see if we can find some way of allowing you to use it more. I want you to focus primarily on refining your chakra control. How will that help, sensei? Naruto asked. At this point your erratic chakra control is beyond your abilities. With some more practice, though, you should be able to improve to a point where you can anchor and sustain a minor illusion on yourself. I'm going to teach you that you will project an image of the eye being covered by your 8 when it's actually exposed. That way you can use your left eye without having to constantly weigh its benefits against the risk of discovery. In Konoha at least it would be even easier. Since everyone already expects you to look like that, no one would think to check for an illusion. It will also help with something else I want you to work on, Kurenai continued. You are competent, but you would be more effective in combat with other options. I've asked Anko to start working with you on ninjutsu instead of sword skills. Sensei, if I may suggest something, Shino said. I think that if it's possible, it would be a good idea for Naruto to learn Haku's method of using one-handed seals. That way he could combine ninjutsu with. Kurenai turned to the raven-haired girl. Is that something you could teach? Haku nodded. Zabuza-san taught me how. In theory anyone can do it, and you can use it with any. He said that it was something that previous generations of mist swordsmen developed before they started adopting two-handed swords. It takes more chakra and willpower to do the same thing, and you have to relearn from the beginning to use it one-handed. But I can try to teach it. Well, it's not like I have any B that are useful for combat now, Naruto said with a shrug. So I won't have to relearn anything. Teammates Jounin instructor clapped her hands together with a sense of finality. Good. Now we all know what we need to work on. I'll see you all tomorrow at our usual training ground. Thanks for watching my video. Leave a like if you enjoyed my video, and also do consider subscribing to my channel for more awesome content. If you want the next part of this story, let me know in the comment box. See you next time. Till then, sayonara.